I'm Eric Marcus, and this is Making Gay History. Today, May 20th, 2026, the National Trust for Historic Preservation released its annual list of America's 11 most endangered historic places. Included on the list is the Stonewall National Monument in New York City, the first and only U.S. national monument dedicated to LGBTQ+ history. According to the Trust, the Stonewall National Monument currently faces federal actions and policy changes that threaten the site's inclusive interpretation, community representation, and educational impact. Actions that continue the federal government's efforts to erase elements that are critical to understanding the LGBTQ+ presence in and contributions to American history. To mark this landmark occasion, we're re-releasing our season about the Stonewall Uprising as a single episode, with the support of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the National Parks Conservation Association, which helped advocate for the national monument. Whether you're new to the Stonewall story or a longtime Making Gay History subscriber, I hope you'll have a listen to better understand the Stonewall National Monument's significance as well as the current threat.
And let's see if I'm picking up. I'm picking up.
Is it working?
Yeah.
All right.
The question was about the movement when it
Yes.
started. Things got cooking.
In 51, with the famous meeting in a closed room in Los Angeles, which has been so often described. And I'm sure it has cropped up.
June 3rd, 1989, at the home of Frank Kameny in Washington, D.C.
I'm Eric Marcus, and this is Making Gay History. It's almost exactly 30 years since I sat down to interview the proudly radical gay rights pioneer Frank Kameny, and he tried to answer that not-so-simple question, when did it all begin? And there's another anniversary this June that's being a bit more widely celebrated, the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. You'll hear some people, not me, other people, say that Stonewall was the place where it all began. Not true. Queer resistance wasn't invented in June 1969. But what happened at Stonewall did mark a key turning point in our history, one of those moments that draws a line between before and after. This first episode of our Stonewall 50 season is about the before. So we're going to take a quick tour through American LGBTQ history pre-Stonewall. And if you want more, we did 11 episodes on this last season. The 1950s had seen anti-gay oppression in the U.S. intensify. Thousands of gay people were fired from their government jobs during the Lavender Scare, the military went on a witch hunt to root out homosexual service members, and police crackdowns on gay bars around the country were on the rise, all at a time when the gay rights movement was in its infancy. And that's why I want to take you back to Frank Kameny's home in Washington, D.C. Frank stepped out of the shadows and fought back against discrimination when he was fired from his government job for being gay. He became a pivotal figure in the movement. Here's the scene. It's 30 years ago. I'm 30. Frank's in his mid-60s and full of vim and vinegar. We're surrounded by piles of files in his dusty, jam-packed office, and Frank's explaining to me the state of the movement in the mid-1950s.
Entire movement in the United States was only 3 or 4 organizations, most of which were chapters of Mattachine. DOB had just started, one incorporated in Los Angeles was the other one.
And I had the audacity to suggest there were several dozen people fighting the good fight.
In the course of all that trip.
Talking several dozen people.
Several dozen? Several people. There weren't several dozen in the movement. You're 1957, not 67 or 77 or 87.
We're talking a few people.
Yes, a person or two.
Could we count them on 2 hands, all the people in the country?
I think you can count them on 1 hand. Well, that overstates. That's hyperbole, but yes. The movement of those days was a very unassertive, apologetic, defensive kind of structure, not taking strong positions, giving a hearing to everybody and saying all views must be heard, even those which were most harshly and viciously condemnatory. As long as it dealt with homosexuality, they must be given a fair hearing. Drivel. We were sick. We were sinners. We were perverts. You have your long litany of pejoratives. There was absolutely nothing whatsoever which anybody heard at any time, anywhere at all, which was other than negative. Nothing. And so the movement predictably responded accordingly, and that was the nature of the movement.
You'll hear echoes of Frank Kameny in what Barbara Giddings had to say when I talked to her in 1989. Barbara and Frank were kindred spirits in what was then known as the homophile movement. While Frank headed up the Washington, D.C. Mattachine Society, Barbara was the founding president of New York City's chapter of the lesbian group, the Daughters of Bilitis.
We were considered sick. So the sickness label infected everything that we said and did and made it very difficult for us to have any credibility for anything we said for ourselves. We were considered sinful, so we had to start dialogue with the churches, and we were considered criminal. So we had to deal with the sodomy laws and, by extension, with any of the laws that controlled our lives or did not give us the freedom that we needed.
Barbara met Kay Lahusen, her partner in life and activism, in 1961. And together, they rejected society's prescriptions for homosexuals.
The going theory at the time was that you were sick and you should go to the doctor and get turned around.
What did the therapist tell them at this time?
Usually trying to cure them.
Fix them.
Mm-hmm. Deep analysis, find out what went wrong in your childhood and so forth. Not too many people just, thought for themselves and thought, this is a crock of shit. It was chic to be going to the therapist. Anybody with any income at all went to the therapist to get straightened out.
Literally.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But as the 1950s waned and the 60s dawned, attitudes had started to shift. A handful of psychologists were questioning whether the sickness label was anything more than a myth. And as the hysteria of the Red Scare eased, so did the witch hunts of the concurrent Lavender Scare. The early 1960s gave way to the mid-60s and a time of upheaval and unrest. From black civil rights and the anti-war movement, to women's rights, assassinations, sexual liberation, and inner-city riots. Confrontations with the police on college campuses and at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago filled television screens on the nightly news. The waves of activism sweeping the country were felt by local gay rights groups, and they began organizing on a national level. Frank Kameny recalls a breakthrough meeting of homophile organizations in New York City in 1965.
We looked around, and to our amazement, there were representatives from 16 gay organizations. We honestly didn't realize there were that many gay groups in the country. And decided, this is wonderful. We have to have a national meeting. So we had a meeting, we set it for February 66 in Kansas City, because Kansas City was equally inaccessible to all the organizations that then existed and didn't favor anybody. By February 66, the 16 had gone up to 20.
Alongside the growing numbers of groups and activists, there was a growing push for visibility. Randy Wicker was a 24-year-old gay rights organizer living in New York City who formed a one-man action committee and marched into community radio station WBAI in 1962 to demand representation.
A lot of people think I was terribly idealistic. I was. But if I didn't do it, no one else would. I mean, on BAI, they had these psychiatrists that were making all these stupid statements about homosexuals. None of them knew a damn thing what they were talking about. I mean, just nonsense. So I went to BAI and I said, why do you have these jerks discussing homosexuals? I can get a group of gay people together that'll tell you more about know more about homosexuality, that live the life than these so-called experts. I never heard such garbage in my life because, they're saying they could change people or cure people or... I mean, every time I turned on the radio, it was one of these creep jerks that are out there looking for guilt-ridden homosexuals to pay them $50 an hour per hour for therapy to cure them. And I was outraged by this. So I began plugging into the network saying, if you're going to have a show on homosexuality, please know we're available. So they would start including us on panels, and especially on the radio. And then I was on every major show.
In addition to early radio and TV appearances, activists staged the first public demonstrations challenging discrimination in employment and the military. And Randy Wicker led the very first public picket in 1964. More protests followed in 1965 at the White House, the Pentagon, and then the first annual July 4th picket outside Philadelphia's Independence Hall. It was called Reminder Day to remind all Americans that gay people were being denied their constitutional rights. Barbara Giddings and Kay Lahusen were at the annual reminders. Interviewing them back in 1989, I asked them if those early pickets were thrilling.
Was that thrilling?
Apologies for being a little off mic.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
You were really, you knew you were doing something momentous.
Right.
And people would stare at you. They had never seen self-declared homosexuals parading
There were
with
like
signs.
50 in the line in front of the
50!
White House.
It wasn't
the
that
second
many.
time.
It was 26.
Well, there was a second picket that had a little bit more people, I believe.
Not many.
But and suits and ties and dresses
And
for
dresses
the women
for
and
the
all
women.
that.
And that was one of the few things we agreed on at the time. All the groups, we hashed it out and decided that we were the bearers of a message, and in order not to attract attention to ourselves, but to get to the message, we'd have to blend into the landscape, so we would look unexceptional.
Right.
Ernestine Eckstein walked those early picket lines too. She was the vice president of the New York chapter of the Daughters of Bilitis, and she brought her experience with the Black civil rights movement to the homophile movement. But when Barbara and Kay interviewed her in 1965, Ernestine told them that polite picketing might not be enough anymore.
Do you believe in forms of civil disobedience for our movement at this time or in the future?
Picketing, I regard as very almost a conservative activity now.
I guess you do.
Sit-ins,
Sure you do.
and that kind of thing are the thing.
Yeah.
And all this is an educational process of calling attention to the unjustness of the situation, which is the same thing the Negro did.
Ernestine wasn't the only activist feeling weighed down by what they considered the homophile movement's cautious approach. Craig Rodwell was a troublemaker who burst out of the closet at a young age. You're going to hear from Craig a lot this season. Pick a significant moment in gay history in the 1960s or 70s. Craig was there. In the late 1950s in Chicago, Craig tried to join the Mattachine Society, but he was turned away because he was too young. Both the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis required members to be 21 or older for fear of being accused of corrupting minors. So Craig saved up his school bus fare and asked for cash for Christmas and birthdays so he could move to New York City and find his people. Teenage Craig had read about the homosexuals who hung out in a mysterious place he called Greenwich Village. He didn't know it was pronounced Greenwich because he'd only ever read it.
So I came to New York in January of '59, ostensibly to study ballet, which I'd studied since I was 7. And I got a scholarship with the New York City Ballet Company. I wanted to be more involved in not only in gay life, but in movement work.
That's Craig, speaking almost 50 years ago in a treasure of an interview we found from 1970. Kay Lahusen is asking the questions. She recorded the interview as research for her book, The Gay Crusaders. Craig told her that when he made it to New York, he headed straight for the Mattachine office. He was 18 years old.
I went to Mattachine immediately. But again, I couldn't really work with them because I wasn't 21. So I subscribed to the newsletter and went to meetings and what have you.
Tell them about it at the ballet school.
Well, all of my fellow students were gay.
I see.
And sure, I used to take them to meetings, or try to get them to go.
Did they dig it?
No, I would get a few of them to go. Because back then, no one really, especially young people, didn't think of homophile organizations as being anything to gain your rights particularly. They were more socializing, hearing speakers on psychology and psychiatry, religion, things like that.
Despite his ballet school friends' reluctance to take part, Craig formally joined the Mattachine Society after his 21st birthday in October 1961. He set about trying to modernize Mattachine from the inside, but as the decade wore on, Craig became more and more frustrated with the movement's self-imposed restrictions.
To me, suits and ties as a uniform are part of the larger heterosexual culture. It's part of how society tries to define us as men and women. You know, men wear this and women wear that.
Craig and Ernestine were on one side of a generational rift that was starting to open up between activists who'd previously been perceived as radicals, Frank Kameny, Barbara Giddings, Kay Lahusen, and a younger generation coming of age in the late 1960s who were losing patience with buttoned-up homophile leaders, a conflict that broke out into the open at one of the Reminder Day protests.
Kay and I had an altercation on this, which I'm sure you remember. 2 women were holding hands on the line, and Frank went up to them and told them to stop. which infuriated me, as you can well remember. I just hit the ceiling. So I went and organized 3 or 4 couples to hold hands. And it created a mini furor within the thing, to the point where I barged up to a reporter and had a verbal fight with Frank, called him anti-Tom, I think.
That's the first time I've heard the term anti-Tom. And you just heard Frank Kameny a few minutes ago. Can you imagine that moment? I wouldn't dare. But I'm not Craig Rodwell. Back to Kay Lahusen's interview with Craig, and you can hear that friction between the generations.
Well, his idea was that you don't call attention to yourself as an individual, that the issues must be pushed, and the person is subservient to the issues.
Yeah, but to me, especially what always has been, one of the main issues, if not the main issue, in my own head, and I'm sure a lot of other people, was that homosexuality is just as viable a way of life as heterosexuality.
But we weren't picketing for a way of life at the time. We were picketing for fair employment and all that shit.
While the homophile organizations were blazing a trail with public demonstrations, albeit dressing conservatively, picketing in a straight line, and asking for employment protections, LGBTQ people also faced routine harassment from the police, entrapment, and physical abuse at the hands of the authorities in cities and towns around the U.S. For a trans woman of color like Marsha P. Johnson, who survived as best she could on the streets of New York City, that oppression meant the constant threat of arrest. When I interviewed her in 1989, Marsha told me that the police picked her up countless times when she worked 42nd Street in the mid-1960s.
And every time we go, like going out to hustle all the time, they would just get us and tell us we were under arrest. Yeah, they'd say, all you drag queens under arrest. So we it was just for wearing a little bit of makeup down 42nd Street. That was like in 1960. When I first came here, it was in 1963.
Back then, if you were wearing fewer than 3 items of clothing that aligned with your legally assigned gender, you could be arrested. That gave the police broad authority to harass and humiliate people who didn't conform to the gender norms of the time.
You want me to tell you how many times I went to jail?
How many times are you going to
This is Sylvia Rivera, who later founded Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries with Marsha. I interviewed her too back in 1989.
Oh, when I was growing up, if you walked down 42nd Street, it even looked like a faggot, you were going to jail.
So you went to jail a few times?
Oh, I went to jail a lot of times.
50 times? 100 times? 200 times?
About 200 times.
What were you in jail for?
Prostitution, bullshit laundering. Back then, when I first started out, I was in women's clothes. It was what they call scare drag.
Scare drag?
Mm-hmm.
What is scare drag?
What I'm wearing right now. You don't have the tits on or anything. You just have a little makeup on. You have your hair out. You got women's clothing on. But every time that I used to go in front of a judge, upper head female impersonation.
That was the charge?
Yeah.
The harassment wasn't confined to 42nd Street and the Street Queens, although they doubtless bore the brunt of it. Craig Rodwell told me Greenwich Village, the so-called gay ghetto, was not exempt.
I mean, back then, on cruising areas, you couldn't stand still. Like on Greenwich Avenue, it was a major cruising area at the time. I mean, every night there'd be hundreds of gay guys sitting on cars and stoops. But if a cop came along, everybody would get up and start walking. And if you didn't, they'd come up and they'd poke you.
What was everyone afraid of?
Being beaten or arrested. And I suppose ultimately of being publicly identified as a homosexual.
What would that mean?
Well, perhaps loss of job, or in other cities, when they would raid gay bars, the papers would publish the name and address and where they worked when the people who were arrested on the front page of the papers the next day. I mean, like they were mass murderers or something.
And Greenwich Village is where we're headed next.
My name's Jay Shockley. I'm one of the founders and co-directors.
And I'm Amanda Davis, the project manager.
With the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project.
I'm on a tour of Greenwich Village with my favorite experts on gay-related sites in New York City. We're standing on the corner where Christopher Street, Greenwich Avenue, and 6th Avenue meet.
On this corner, across the street, where there's now a garden, was an enormous Art Deco prison that was the Women's House of Detention. Actually was the first all-women's prison in New York City. In terms of the gay community, it was famous and infamous because if lesbians were in bars that were raided, they were taken to this house of detention, and it became notorious in the village. There were lesbians on the street that were shouting to their girlfriends. The straight residents of Greenwich Village had a long campaign to have it demolished because they didn't like that street interaction and the constant screaming.
Yeah, and actually, Joan Nessel, who went on to co-found the Lesbian History Archives, famously said that it was called the Country Club by many lesbians who were arrested and put there at that time.
So this was even going on in 1968-69 when if a women's bar was raided, the women would be carted to the Women's House of Detention.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a major intersection. The PATH station coming in from New Jersey is just across the street from there. The northern end of the Washington Square subway stop is just south of 8th Street. So this is a major focal point for people getting out of subways. If you continued west from this site, then you'd start hitting bars that were all along Christopher Street.
Stonewall wasn't the only bar.
As far as lesbian bars, there was the Pony Stable Inn on West 4th Street, right off of Washington Square Park. There was the Sea Colony, which was very popular on 8th Avenue, just north of here, and the Bagatelle on University Place. These were all in existence as far as gay male bars.
Yeah, Julius's, which is just one block away from here around the corner, was a very popular gay bar and very important bar. Also, just across 7th Avenue South on Grove Street, Marie's Crisis was always a popular piano bar. There definitely were places on Greenwich Avenue. Some of them may not have been bars. They may have been cafes that may or may not have had liquor licenses.
I'm looking down the street now, and I don't see gay men parading up and down the street. From what I understand, both Greenwich Avenue and Christopher Street were major points at which gay men in particular met.
Prior to Stonewall actually happening, Greenwich Avenue was the main cruising spot all the way from Christopher Street up to 7th Avenue up there. Now, on the other hand, I'll qualify that to an extent because people were always going down Christopher Street down to the piers and men looking for other men, sex, whatever. Way back, there were waterfront-oriented bars when those were the steamship piers. So there always was street traffic going all the way down there.
For people who don't know, what was cruising? I mean, cruising isn't what it used to be because so many people now meet online. But in the olden days, when you and I were young, what was cruising?
Well, cruising is different in different locations. I mean, everybody, if you've seen any movies that are set in the 50s, American movies, in small towns, people are cruising in cars. They're going to the courthouse square or whatever else. All young people and all teenagers are looking to meet other similar-aged people, whether it's just to hang out with or socialize or whatever. In terms of New York and the LGBT community, specifically, cruising was either lingering in doorways or on street corners or walking up and down the street looking to meet other men for socializing or for sex or anywhere in between or beyond.
Thank you. I'm glad the rain.
Yes, we're lucky. Bye-bye.
The program is the New Symposium. My name is Charles Pitts, and the members of the New Symposium are
Del Tyson,
Kermit Lamb,
Craig Rodwell,
Leon Smith,
Louis Milletta.
Should mention that Craig Rodwell is visiting us tonight to discuss the subject, which is cruising areas.
This is the WBAI show, The New Symposium. This edition of the show was broadcast in August 1968. Things had moved on since Randy Wicker's first appearance on WBAI back in 1962, and by now there was a whole show dedicated to gay life. As you just heard, the main focus of this broadcast was cruising. But first,
news and reviews.
The show followed a simple format. At the top of the show, news and reviews, when the assembled panel, almost always entirely composed of gay men, would scan the newspapers and tease out stories affecting the gay community. And they give us a unique window into gay life in New York City at the time. Here's Craig Rodwell explaining a story he found about an incident at the docks on the far west side of Greenwich Village.
One morning last week at 3:30 a.m., a transit authority policeman just happened to be passing by the infamous docks at the foot of Christopher Street on his way home. And there he observed three men leaving the back of a truck.
The trucks were another fixture of gay life in the village, a place where men went to have sex in the back of freight trucks parked overnight underneath the elevated West Side Highway that ran past the mostly abandoned shipping piers.
And when the cop went to question the three men what they were doing in the back of the truck. And as the story goes in the Times, one of these three men pulled a screwdriver, whereupon the cop pulled a gun and killed the man, and the other two men fled. There's much more to this story, I'm sure, than meets the eye. The two men that fled, we would appreciate it very much if you would contact Charles Pitts or Baird Searles here at WBAI. Your identity will be protected. We would like to know the story of really what happened.
It does sound a little suspicious.
Well, I think the most incredible part of the story is that this transit authority patrolman just happened to pass by the docks on his way home at 3:30 in the morning. It isn't a place you just happen to pass by. I don't care where your home is unless you live in a houseboat at the foot of Christopher Street.
And now Kermit Lamb pulls out an item from the scenes column in the Village Voice, the now-defunct alternative downtown weekly newspaper.
Howard Smith in Scenes column had happened to notice in last week's Voice that there was an awful lot of cruising or homosexual activity at the corner of 6th and 8th in the Village. A lot of the rest of us have noticed it for years. Apparently, according to Mr. Smith, it's a game among some people down there to figure out which are the boys and which are the girls, and that's no news either.
They also comment on police raids at the popular gay summer destination of Fire Island before turning to the main discussion.
The subject tonight is meeting places, cruising spots.
Buckle up and get ready for a whistle-stop tour of gay New York in 1968.
That doesn't necessarily mean bars. It includes a lot of things. I suppose you can cover in just a few sentences a lot of the public places, such as certain areas of 3rd Avenue, which in the 50s is more commercial, and farther up 3rd Avenue in the 60s is less so. Central Park West, Times Square, many areas of the Village, and small local spots like Brooklyn Heights Promenade. I have some friends who live near Columbia who cruise a lot along the park, along the Riverside Drive. There's a little postage stamp park at the end of 57th and Sutton Place. The only thing there is you almost have to have a dog to cruise there because everybody cruises with their dogs. You have to discuss fees, various things, you know. So, and then, of course, there's always the kind of people who will do Subway John's, tea rooms, Grand Central, Port Authority, all of that kind of public thing.
There's a one-way mirror in the urinals at Grand Central, and the next time you're in Grand Central, just just glance, glance down, and give a wave to whomever is behind there, or whatever is behind there, if it's a camera.
You know, recently I had the opportunity of taking some friends from Michigan around New York, visiting several gay bars. I thought to myself that it'd be interesting if we would plan out several routes, you know, to give a potpourri to people in the city that they could take. So I started them at the Stonewall to give them the younger set, plus the dancing boys. I thought was kind of cute. They had never seen anything, and they were a little taken back when they walked in. And from there we walked down Christopher Street to the next block over. And the nice thing about this is that you don't have to walk too far without getting into another place and another kind of clientele. And on the corner of, Christopher and Hudson? Right down from the Theatre de Lis, there's another bar at that corner. Is that Danny's?
Yeah, just a little below that, yeah.
That's an interesting group of people. And then we went from there to Keller's to kind of get the leather, and we ended up at the docks. So they had a full swing of what would call from one end to the other of the gay life and the gay bars in New York City.
That younger set at Stonewall? It included Martin Boyce, born and raised in Manhattan by working-class parents. During the summer, Martin would spend every night of the week at the Stonewall or on the streets of the Village with a band of mostly homeless teenagers, many of whom dressed in scare drag. These days, they might describe themselves as gender nonconforming. Martin was one of those rare street kids who had a home to go to. 50 years later, Martin is a 71-year-old with a poet's soul. When we meet on Christopher Street outside the Stonewall Inn on a gusty spring day, you'd never guess this kindly-looking man with thinning white hair was once a scare-drag-wearing street queen. The two of us look on as a group of school kids on a field trip play in the small park that was designated the Stonewall National Monument by President Barack Obama in 2016. Today, the Village is a really wealthy neighborhood and pretty straight. What was it like through your eyes then? What was the character of the Village in the 1960s?
Well, the character of the Village in the 1960s was a welcome mat. I mean, for any dissident group. But it didn't say it was going to be easy. But you felt if you went down there, you were very hopeful that things could go your way. You could make friends and meet other interesting people. But yes, the Village was a place where biracial couples would congregate, where gays could go, where the hippies, the beatniks at the time too, could go. And people like that, everybody could find a little spot in the Village, or at least tolerance, but real tolerance. They didn't have to like you. They'd let you alone, they'd serve you, and they'd deal with you. And that was all we really wanted from a neighborhood.
What was the terrain like? How many was it? Was it a 5-block range, a 10-block range? Was it from 6th Avenue to the river, from Christopher North? What was your terrain?
Our place was Christopher Street, Greenwich Avenue, those side streets, and spreading out from the docks within 2 or 3 blocks. But it seemed like a world, because psychologically it changed from Christopher Street near Greenwich Avenue, to the river, this lonesome place. Fascinating and dark and interesting.
You had a lot of trouble around different parts of the city about getting beaten up.
Yes.
Was it a fear for you ever in the Village when you were a kid that this was a dangerous place for you?
The Village at the time was a very dangerous place if you went off Christopher on your own, depending what time of night. There was a lot of gay bashing. But in order to gay bash you, they got to isolate you. It's almost like a Pride of Lions. They isolate you and then they get you. For some reason, that's part of the pleasure or that's part of the way things are. So you had to be wary. The further you got from Christopher Street, the more wary you were. A typical night out would be to expect nothing, not to make really too many plans, because you knew something was going to happen that was out of your control and interesting. It was just interesting to go out. Interesting to go to the stoop where all the queens were hanging out. Interesting to listen to last night's stories, especially if you missed one night in the Village. And some queen would get up and tell her story, what happened just the night before, and then there would be a discourse, like a approval of what she did or how she handled it, or how it could be handled better. And everybody would listen and joke and have fun. You had to give a sense of loyalty, not to that particular group like in a lodge or anything, but to the camaraderie of the street.
How old were you the first time you went to the Stonewall Inn?
18. I first heard about the Stonewall quickly because I was with the hip crowd, so we would really know. It was about dancing. People could dance. I wasn't into dancing that much, but the real thing was the excitement of everybody going. When I went to Stonewall, I was of the preferred age because I was 18 years old, and that's who they wanted, because these are the kind of... It's like letting women into a bar. You're going to find men. And if you let young gays in, you're going to find... I wouldn't say predators, but people searching. And sometimes predators.
While Martin and his friends were dancing at the Stonewall and cruising the streets of the Village, back in the WBAI studio, the new symposium panelists were pontificating about gay nightlife.
Many and various kinds of bars, which might include leather bars or the dance bars, the private clubs, which is a new thing since the Great Purge of the middle 60s. The clubs started up.
As you heard in our last season, the Mattachine Society of New York had turned its attention to fighting entrapment and regulations that made it illegal for gay people to drink in bars. And they'd made some progress.
Shortly after the Lindsay administration took over, when harassment and pressure on gay bars lessened, not particularly because of Lindsay, but because of the challenge of the State Liquor Authority.
By the late 1960s, the routine practice of police entrapment of gay men was allegedly over, and gay bars were allegedly legal.
Remembered, especially since January, when Judge Keating ruled that dancing between homosexuals is legal.
But that progress was accompanied by an explosion in the number of private clubs, and Craig Rodwell was not a fan.
And the reason for the private clubs, it's the mafia's new way of keeping people out they don't want in there, such as
health department.
Health department, right. There's nothing illegal about a gay bar anymore, except for the fact that the mafia is running them, and the heat's on them. But if they call them private clubs, they're a little more insular and have a little more protection.
What are some of the clubs? Do you know?
Oh, at the moment, there's probably 100 in Manhattan.
Yeah.
New ones every week opening up.
And I know that the Corduroy Club is still going. I've checked. The Telstar, I think, is the same setup. The Stonewall is a club setup too, isn't it?
It's a setup of some kind.
As Craig said, the Stonewall was a setup of some kind, which apparently made it ripe for 2 police raids in the same week of June 1969. But it's the second raid we remember, because that's when the shit hit the fan. Next week, we'll bring you voices from that second raid and from the riots it sparked, a series of events beginning in the early morning hours of Saturday, June 28, 1969, that are known by just one word these days: Stonewall. Many thanks to everyone who makes Making Gay History possible: executive producer Sarah Birmingham, producer Josh Gwynn, assistant producer Mo Laborde, administrative and special projects manager Inga Detaya, sound design and mixing by Ray Kantrowitz. Thanks to our photo editor Michael Green and our social media team Cristiana Pena, Nick Porter, and Denio Lorenko. Thanks also to our intrepid researchers, Brian Faree and Brian DeShazer. Special thanks to Jenna Weiss-Berman. Our theme music was composed by Fritz Myers. Making Gay History is a co-production of Pineapple Street Media, with assistance from the New York Public Library's Manuscripts and Archives Division and One Archives at the USC Libraries. Season 5 of this podcast has been made possible with funding from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, the Calamus Foundation, Irwin and Andrew Press, and our listeners, like Hal Brody. Thanks, Hal. Stay in touch with Making Gay History by signing up for our newsletter at makinggayhistory.com. Our website is also where you'll find previous episodes, archival photos, full transcripts, and additional information on each of the people and stories we feature. So long, until next time. I'm Eric Marcus, and this is Making Gay History. In the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, I was 10 years old, sound asleep in my bunk at Camp Luema in Sussex, New Jersey. I already knew I was different, but hadn't yet put my finger on exactly why. I was a Lego nut, a big reader, a total loser when it came to team sports, and I struggled to learn how to swim. I had a girlfriend, Eva Newman, who was also 10. We looked so much alike, the same height with thick, wavy brown hair and green eyes, that people thought we were twins, which didn't creep me out at all because it never occurred to me that that would be creepy. Maybe because she wasn't that kind of girlfriend. We held hands, played cards, which was about as far as I'd ever want to go with any girl. On that hot night in June 1969, asleep under a full moon in the New Jersey countryside, I was dreaming of my cat Tiger Lily, who I missed terribly. That's my story about that night 50 years ago. But while I was safely tucked into bed at Camp Luema, a rumbling of discontent was about to erupt into something much bigger, 50 miles away in New York City. There are a lot of stories about that momentous night in New York City's Greenwich Village. Stories much closer to the action than mine. Sadly, many of the people with direct experience of what happened around 1 a.m. on Saturday, June 28th at the Stonewall Inn, through that night and the nights that followed, have since died. So we've gathered almost a dozen accounts from interviews recorded in the year after the riots, from my archive from the late 1980s and one from a more recent conversation. There are contradictions and inconsistencies in the accounts. Not everyone agrees, not everyone saw it from the same spot, memories change with time, and they rarely exactly match. But these oral histories, these personal stories, will bring this moment to life through the voices of the people who lived it. A note on language: you're going to hear the terms queen, scare drag queen, and transvestite used a lot. Those words don't mean the same thing as they did back then. In some cases, they've fallen out of usage, in others they're offensive terms now. But it's the language of the time and the people who were there, and we're here to hear their voices. It's time for me to step back and let Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Morty Manford, Vito Russo, Craig Rodwell, Damian Martin, and Dick Leitch tell you their stories. I spoke with all of them 30 years ago, and they've all since died. You'll also hear from Martha Shelley, who is still fighting for social justice on the West Coast, from Randy Wicker, who turned 81 last February, and from Martin Boyce, who met me outside the current Stonewall Inn to tell me about its previous incarnation.
My name is Martin Boyce, and I'm a Stonewall veteran.
So we walk up to the front of the Stonewall. What was it like? You arrive at the front door. What happens next?
Well, you arrive at the front door, and then you wait for them to say, either we're full or you can't come in because of this or that. That means you just weren't being allowed in. And if that didn't happen, which usually didn't happen, you would just go in. You'd pay your way. You sign the book.
It was called the private club to Stonewall.
The Stonewall was an illegal club. It was very mob run. I mean, it was so obviously mob, and they used it as a money drop and all kinds of stuff like that.
Right near the door was the table with the mafia guy. I mean, that was pretty intimidating. I mean, it was like...
First, it was just a gay men's bar, and they didn't allow no women in. And then they start allowing women in, and then they let the drag queens in. I was one of the first drag queens to go to that place.
Okay, you could get into the Stonewall if they knew you. And there were only a certain amount of drag queens that were allowed into the Stonewall at that time.
It was a slum. I mean, it was really a slum scumbag place with the only sleazy crowd, the worst crowd of people you've ever seen in your life.
It was a very eclectic crowd, which was one of the nice things about it.
And then they had these drag queens working there. And there was this Tiffany and this other drag queen that used to work there in the coat check room. And
this is where I get into arguments with people. They say, oh no, it's always a drag queen bar and it was a black bar. No.
The place itself was pretty much of a dive. It was pretty shabby, and the glasses weren't particularly clean when they served you a drink, and they were watered down drinks.
The Stonewall didn't have any hot water. They washed their glasses in cold water, and they were spreading all kinds of diseases from one person to another.
But they had some lights in the back on the dance floor area, and there was a jukebox.
And it was the first place I ever seen Go-Go Boys. Because they used to have several Go-Go Boys that used to dance on the bar at that place.
And then you went through 2 swinging doors into a dance floor where people danced. And
there was another bar back there and tables where people sat. And it was just like a separate little atmosphere.
They really had a culture in there. It was really interesting and meaningful, because here there was a group of gays that, especially those scare drags who are really persecuted, really enjoying themselves as if the world were normal, and not worrying that the sun will come up, and not worrying about tomorrow, in an amazing way. A celebration of surviving another day, living another night, maybe meeting another trick.
The Stonewall had opened its doors as a mob-run private club in March 1967, 3 years after a fire had gutted Bonnie's Stonewall Inn. That was the restaurant that had occupied the space for 3 decades or so. The new owners of the Stonewall, affiliated with the Genovese crime family, slapped black paint on the walls to cover the fire damage, put in a jukebox, and started selling watered-down drinks and bootlegged liquor to a crowd with few other options. Private clubs like the Stonewall were being raided by the cops with increasing frequency. Those raids were usually cleared up pretty fast, with a payoff from mobster bar owners, as Sylvia Rivera explained to me.
They would come in, raid a gay bar, padlock the freaking door. The police would leave one way, The mafia was there, cutting in the door. They had a new register, they had more money, and they had more booze.
On Tuesday, June 24th, 1969, Inspector Seymour Pine from the NYPD Public Morals Division raided the Stonewall Inn. The Tuesday night raid went off like so many others. The patrons were escorted out, the bar staff were arrested, and the proceeds were confiscated. According to Stonewall historian David Carter, one of the bar's owners assured Inspector Pine that night that the Stonewall would be back up and running the next day. It was. So Seymour Pine planned another, more consequential raid that would happen a few days later.
On June 28, 1969, thousands of homosexuals rioted in New York's Greenwich Village section. The disorders began with a routine police raid on a homosexual bar, the Stonewall, on Christopher Street, in the heart of the West Village, commonly referred to as the gay ghetto of New York.
Morty Manford was inside the bar that night.
I was inside and I was a patron.
He had no idea that two female undercover officers were already mingling with the clientele to scope things out. But he couldn't miss it when Inspector Pine and 5 other cops came in. According to historian David Carter's exhaustive research, the time was 1:20 a.m.
Some very officious-looking men in suits and ties entered the place. Whispers went around that the place was being raided. Suddenly, the lights were turned up, the doors were sealed, and all of the patrons were held captive until the police and the federal agents decided what they were going to do.
So you were inside?
I was inside.
And Sylvia Rivera was there that night too, apparently.
At that time, I didn't know Sylvia Rivera.
And I just happened to be there when it all jumped off. The police came in. They came in to get their payoff, as usual. There's the same people that used to always come into the Washington Square bar, too, get their payoff.
It was a nervous mood that set over the place. Everybody was anxious, not knowing whether we were going to be arrested or what was happening next. We had to line up and our identification would be checked before we would be freed. People who did not have identification or people who were underage and transvestites as a whole group were being detained. And those people who didn't meet their standards were incarcerated temporarily in the coat room.
They were put in a closet.
But that's right. Little did the police know the ironic symbolism of that.
Yes.
But they found out fast.
I don't know if it was the customers or was the police. It just, everything clicked.
As people were released, they didn't run away and they stayed outside. They awaited the release of their friends. Some of the gays coming out of the bar would take a bow and their friends would cheer when they came out, and it was a colorful thing.
This was one of the things we did. If you were not in a raid, you'd watch the aftermath. It was almost like, celebrating your good luck and seeing like Schadenfreude, I think the Germans say. It was a march of gays who had taken their chance by going to a gay bar, And that's the way it was. They got caught and you didn't.
When they ushered us out, it was nice, when they just very nicely put you out the door and then you're standing across the street in Sheridan Square Park.
The tension started to grow, and after everybody who was going to be released was released, the prisoners were herded into a paddy wagon parked right on the sidewalk in front of the bar, and they were left unguarded by the local police, and they simply walked out and left the paddy wagon to the cheer of the throng.
There's a couple of dykes they took out and threw in a car. They got out one side and...
But there was trouble between one of the drag queens in the paddy wagon and the cop outside.
Well, there's one drag queen that, they brought her out, and I don't know what she said. It's just that,
And she kicked him. I only saw her heel kick him back, but that was enough. for him to jump in the back of the car.
They just beat her into a bloody pulp.
You heard it. You heard the sounds of flesh and bone against metal. And, it was a sound we all knew. We all winced.
Craig Rodwell just happened to be passing by the Stonewall with his lover, Fred Sargent, that night. Craig's account comes from an almost 50-year-old tape that we retrieved from the vault of the New York Public Library's Manuscripts and Archives Division.
And we were passing through Sheridan Square, and we noticed this big crowd from the Stonewall. There was a police van out front, and a crowd of about 500 people, I would say. And it was obvious what was going on. We asked people to remain in Stonewall and so forth. And I remember I started yelling things like, "Get the mafia on the bars," or something. Fred punched and shut up.
He was like, "Sylvia, don't go off." And I'm like, "Why not?" I said, "I have to go off." I said, "I have to be part of this." I said, "I have to. The feeling is here."
You saw what you want, you fags. Now get the hell out of here. Show's over. And turn around like you always turn around, with complete confidence. And we started moving towards him. I mean, nobody looked at each other. Nobody discussed anything. We just started moving towards him.
Everybody's looking at each other. But why do we have to keep on constantly putting up with this?
Somebody in the crowd started throwing pennies, or some people in the crowd threw pennies across the street.
The nickels, the dimes, the pennies.
Pennies started being thrown.
The quarters. Started flying.
Why that? Why do people do that?
The payoff. That was the payoff. That was the payoff.
It was to symbolize the payoff.
Yeah. You already got.
Here's some more.
And here's some more.
I think that the riot started in a bunch of places at the same time because there was provocation for everybody along that line.
It sort of happened before you knew it. Large objects started to be thrown. Bottles, beer cans.
One person apparently threw a rock, which broke one of the windows on the second floor. And at the shattering of glass, the crowd sort of, ooh. It was a dramatic gesture of defiance.
Mm-hmm. The riot was on in my section. On.
And everything is going off really fast. I thought it was going off really fast. The cops locked themselves in the bar.
The police began to see that the crowd was hostile and was mad and getting madder. So they retreated within the Stonewall and locked the doors.
A policeman had been hit in the face by some sort of flying object, and it drew blood. As the cops beat a hasty retreat into the bar, they grabbed a bystander, musician Dave Van Ronk, and dragged him in too, barricading themselves inside with guns drawn. Inspector Seymour Pine would later say it was more terrifying than any of his combat experiences during the Second World War.
On my way home from work, I'm walking west on Christopher Street towards 7th Avenue, and there's this huge thing going on outside the Stonewall.
And we see these people who are looking younger than I am, and they're throwing things at cops. And I said, "Oh, it's a riot. These things happen in New York all the time,
The typical nonchalant New Yorker.
Right. Or putting it on. I said, well, let's toddle away and do something else.
And it escalated. A few more rocks.
And it was at that point that 2 or 3 people in the crowd got a parking meter. They started using it as a battering ram at the door. I mean, it was like medieval, across the moat trying to break the council doors down.
The cops were, they just panicked.
Somebody stuck a gun out.
Inspector Pine really panicked. He really did.
Somebody from inside the bar opened the door, and they were almost reaching out with a gun, telling people to stay back.
Plus, he had no backup.
And then withdrew the gun, closed the door, went back inside.
He did not expect any of the retaliation that the gay community gave him at that point.
And then somebody else or other people took a garbage can, set it on fire, one of those wire mesh sanitation department garbage containers, and threw the burning garbage into the premises. the location where this window was that was now set afire was where the coat room was.
Burning the closet.
Burning the closet, exactly.
I don't know where they got the Molotov cocktails, but they ended up showing up. They were thrown through the door and whatnot.
I don't know. Somebody set it on fire because, you know, they said the police set it on fire.
Someone squirted lighter fluid inside an opening in the window and tried to set it on fire, and this fire hose started coming up from the side.
I was uptown. I didn't get downtown till about 2 o'clock. When I got downtown, the place was already on fire and it was a raid already.
There was an incident with Marsha Johnson at the Stonewall riot.
There was lots of incidents with Marsha in the Stonewall riot.
Do you recall any of those incidents?
The firemen came down the street because they had set the building on fire.
And meanwhile, all kinds of bottles were still being thrown. More and more chants were becoming more and more vocal, and more people were coming around.
So by the time I got there, it was basically over. And yet people were still on the sidewalks screaming at who they perceived to be the enemy, who was the owners of the bar. I went across the street to the park. There's that little triangular park. And I sat in a tree. I mean, there was a branch. And I watched what was going on, but I didn't want to get involved.
Nothing in a riot is more frightening or unnerving than silence. Immediate silence.
In those days, New York City police had a guerrilla-prone cadre of their ranks known as the Tactical Police Force.
Everybody looked around because it was silent. Why?
The TPF. TPF.
The TPF arrived in large numbers.
And you heard this thumping, like goose stepping. And the crowd opened, and there was the Tactical Police Force, armed to the teeth.
Yeah, they want a confrontation.
Shields and face shields. And
police were out there with those clubs and things and their helmets on, riot helmets.
Every kind of riot control piece of equipment they could have.
And there were reports in the press of chorus lines of queens kicking up their heels at the cops like rockets, you know, we are the Stonewall girls and, you know, fuck you police.
And we all made this long line of rocket-like kicks and singing one of our big ditties we used to always sing when we all got drunk.
Were you one of those that got in the chorus lines and kicked their heels up at the police?
We are the village girls. We wear our hair in curls. We wear our dungaree above our Nelly knee. And when it comes to boys, we simply hypnotize. But that's when it stopped, because that's when they charged us.
The way they then started chasing after people and hitting people with their billy clubs, I think that may have made it greater than it was.
Well, I got knocked a little bit by a couple of plainclothes men. I didn't really get hurt. I was very careful that night, thank God. You know, I didn't get really hurt, but I saw other things, other people being hurt, and that's like by the police. It was just like inhumane, unsenseless bullshit.
But everywhere I looked, people were agitating. The leaders, the stronger ones, the black queens, Latin queens, the ethnic queens that were butch, and queens that had enough and lived in worse neighborhoods and suffered enough. Everybody was going crazy.
Turning over cars and, oh my God, blocking traffic and screaming and hollering and everything.
And they pushed the crowd back across 7th Avenue. But the crowd just split up, went around the blocks, and just came back at it again, like charging the police. It really was amazing the police were as restrained as they were. And looking back on it, I think it was because they didn't. It's a particular embarrassment if the police don't have in the papers the next morning they had to use tear gas, any kind of force against group of homosexuals. And that was the whole turning point in the attitudes of gay people.
When did you first hear the chant "Gay Power"? Was it that weekend?
I think I was the first one to say it when Fred shut me up. Maybe somebody before had said it. I don't know. It was that night, the first time I heard it. You know, from groups of people, yeah.
And then somebody came along and spray painted on the front of Stonewall a message to the community to quiet down, that this was our neighborhood and we weren't going to let them take it away from us. And everybody should calm down and go home.
The fighting died down, the sun was coming up, 13 arrests were being processed at the precinct, and Martin Boyce and his friends were spent. All rioted out for the time being, they watched a new day dawn over Greenwich Village. So it's dawn,
right,
and you're sitting on a stoop
right
across the street where we're standing now.
Right.
And what did you see as the sun began to rise?
As the sun began to rise, with my head down and tired, I kept looking up and I saw this queen who was exhausted, bruised a little, I believe, and couldn't go on anymore, was just on a stoop. Exhausted but at peace, because near her was a cop who was also exhausted that made no attempt to bother her. I mean, the riot was really over. Still, the street was glistening. It was one of the most beautiful things I ever saw. The whole street, just like diamonds. But in reality, it was broken glass. The smell of the smoke of burning garbage cans was there. All those smells that a riot make, even a certain kind of sweat. It was ugly and beautiful. It was something, though. All of these bad images were enveloped in a certain kind of beauty that was coincidence and haphazardly. But then so was the riot, so maybe it was a metaphor for that, because I don't know. But I did notice it. I did stop and register it and memorialized it. And I remember, because the one thing I always said afterwards, even shortly after Stonewall, was the end of that night and how that street glistened.
The first night of unrest was over, but the uprising had just begun. Martha Shelley had managed to miss the riot. She was the one you heard saying that riots happened all the time in New York City. After toddling off, as she put it, she had hitchhiked from the village to her lover's house in New Jersey, woke up the morning after the raid, and headed back into the city for a Daughters of Bilitis meeting.
I don't remember what it was. I was part of running the meeting, and I don't remember what the speech was. Then I found out what happened. From lack of sleep and exhaustion, I was sort of feverish. And I lay on my couch that evening thinking, we got to do something. We got to do something. We can't just let this pass. We should have a march.
Meanwhile, the police went to the Mattachine Society's office to beg, that the riot not continue another night.
Anyway, the cops came that day, that Saturday. Came flying up to Mattachine. Help, help, make these people stop. Make them leave us alone. And, well, first of all, they were defensive. We had to do this because. I said, yes, I understand you had to do because. That's what you've been doing for all these years. You got to expect people to get upset sooner or later. You got to stop sometime. Oh, we'll stop. Just please get them off our backs, make everything calm down. So we didn't know what to do. So we just went down and walked the streets and talked to people.
And then on Saturday night, it was much the same thing. Starting about 9, crowds started to gather in the area, sort of small groups on the sidewalk. And then around 11 or 12, they started taking over the street, stopping cars from coming through, unless there were gay people in them. A few fires were set. But generally, there's an angry mood, a lot of chanting, a lot of hand-holding, a lot of assertion of being gay. And it was a way of saying we're tired of hiding, tired of leading two lives, tired of denying our basic identity, denying ourselves. The newfound pride, really, a collective pride in their identity.
For the next 2 or 3 nights, there were constant confrontations. The police would come along and sweep the area.
The second night, I, for some reason, had to go up 6th Avenue in a cab. And I passed by right there where the old women's house of detention used to be. And they had police lines up, and they were keeping the crowds back. And there were these gay and lesbian people chanting. And the main thing I remember about it was the look on the cops' faces. That they had that look that you sometimes see with someone who has a trusted pet who suddenly just bit them. There's that astonishment and fear at the same time that is, not like terror or anything, but just astonishment is a large part of it. And I got a great pleasure out of the look on their faces.
What did you say to the police?
We just were saying no more police brutality, and we had enough of police harassment in the village and other places. Oh, there was a lot of little chants we used to do in those days.
On those later nights, there was a lot more people, and we took over the whole area and closed down the streets. The third or fourth night, I don't remember which night. It was right up here at the corner of Greenwich and Christopher. And I was up at this corner, and Marcia had climbed to the top of the light pole. I don't remember specifically whether it was Platform Heels that night or Joan Crawford Fuck Me Shoes or what, you know. Anyway, it was a cop car pulled in and parked on Greenwich Avenue, sort of right under where the light pole is. And Marcia just threw the thing right through the windshield of the cop car. And I was only a few feet away, and I remember the cops, and they knew it came from up there, you know. They didn't care. They just opened the back door and just grabbed the nearest faggot, pulled him in, and then the other started driving. You could see him just beating with a nightstick, you know.
By the end of the week, scores of police and rioters had been injured. Many were arrested, and one man, a cab driver, was dead.
That cab driver was driving down Christopher Street when rioters blocked his way and rocked the cab. He died later in the hospital of an apparent heart attack. His was the only fatality related to the riots.
Almost every homosexual who was in New York at the time of the Stonewall Rebellion has his own private memory of what took place.
We would sit on a stoop on Christopher Street and wait for them to come and move us along, and then we would go around the block to where Julius's is and come back and sit down again until they came and moved us again. And this got to be like a 2 or 3 day game. People were like setting fires in waste paper baskets on Sheridan Square and chanting and screaming.
You were primarily an observer?
Yes. Yes. I had no connection or knowledge that there was, in fact, the beginnings of an activist movement going on right around that issue.
Maybe Vito Russo didn't know an activist movement was springing out of the uprising, but as the dust settled and June gave way to July, organizers called meetings almost immediately.
And I went to Gene Powers and said, we should have a march. Gene said, well, if Mattachine Society agrees, we'll co-sponsor it. Mattachine was having a town hall meeting. Town hall, it turns out, was this building that held about 400 people.
They asked me to speak at the Electric Circus. It was a big disco in East Village.
This was after the riot?
This was during the riot, or right at the time of the riot.
And there were all these gays that showed up at the meeting to talk about what was going on.
You showed up as well?
Yeah. With the proposal that we hold a jointly sponsored march.
I got up and said I didn't think the way to win public acceptance was to go out and form chorus lines of drag queens kicking your feet up at the police.
And Dick Leitch, who was the head of Mattachine, wasn't really into it.
I was just beginning to speak, and one of the bouncers at the Electric Circus found out that it was a gay thing, that the guy up there talking was gay, and somebody standing next to him, he said to them, are you one of them? And the guy said yes, and he began beating the hell out of him, and this riot broke out in the Electric Circus.
When he asked for a vote, how many people were in favor of holding a march, every hand went up.
The kid was only about 21 or 22 years old, and he said, all I know is that I've been in this movement for 3 days, and I've been beaten up 3 times.
So he said, okay, if people want to run a march, march committee meets over there.
Next week, we'll bring you the story of that march and the first Christopher Street Liberation Day March, which was held to mark the 1-year anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. If not for that anniversary march, which was the culmination of intensive organizing that the riots inspired, Stonewall might very well have been lost to history. Many thanks to everyone who makes Making Gay History possible. Executive producer Sarah Birmingham, producer Josh Gwynn, assistant producer Mo Laborde, administrative and special projects manager Inge Dataya, scoring, mixing, and sound design by Ray Kantrowitz, photo editor Michael Green, and our social media team Cristiana Pena, Nick Porter, and Daniel Lorenko. Thanks also to our intrepid researchers Brian Faree and Brian DeShazer. Special thanks to Jenna Weiss-Berman. Our theme music was composed by Fritz Myers. Making Gay History is a co-production of Pineapple Street Media, with assistance from the New York Public Library's Manuscripts and Archives Division, the One Archives at the USC Libraries, and the Pacifica Radio Archive. Season 5 of this podcast has been made possible with funding from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, the Calamus Foundation, Irwin and Andrew Press, and a special thank you to everyone at Stonewall Kickball in Washington, D.C. for your generous donation. Stay in touch with Making Gay History by signing up for our newsletter at makinggayhistory.com. Our website is also where you'll find previous episodes, archival photos, full transcripts, and additional information on each of the people and stories we feature. So long, until next time.
Do you think all this was in part because people were so angry for so long?
People were very angry for so long. I mean, how long can you live in a closet?
It's the beginning of July 1969, and the riots are over. But some of the most important things about the Stonewall uprising have yet to happen. I want to take you through the year or so of chaos, organizing, protest, and celebration that happened after Stonewall, to hear how activists took 6 nights of unrest in Greenwich Village and built them into a national movement. And we're going to try to trace how the anger that erupted outside the Stonewall Inn was channeled, co-opted, and in some cases excluded from organizations and events that helped shape the movement for decades to come. How anger fueled power and joy coalesced into pride. I'm Eric Marcus. This is Making Gay History's Stonewall 50 season, and I'm joined by an amazing guide to help us on this part of our journey.
This is Breck Artery, and I am the producer and narrator of a documentary record album called June 28th, 1970, Gay and Proud.
The Stonewall Rebellion served notice on the heterosexual majority that a growing number of gays were not afraid anymore and were not content to continue living out their lives in fear and oppression.
Breck Artery made the first ever documentary about Stonewall and its aftermath in 1970. He made it in his spare time with a Sony tape recorder, and he released it as a vinyl record, pressing just 400 or so copies.
The Stonewall Rebellion will be remembered as one of the major turning points in the homosexual struggle for equality.
When I held this record and played it for the first time just a couple of months ago, it gave me chills. The album cover reads, June 28th, 1970, Gay and Proud, a living history of the homosexual rights movement. Put it on a turntable, drop the needle, and you'll hear the sound of a revolution. An audio documentary made by a gay person about the year that gay liberation found its voice.
June 28th, 1970. One of the most important days in the history of the American homosexuals' fight for freedom. Thousands marched in New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles. They represented the mood of growing militancy in the United States gay community.
That powerful, revolutionary voice emerged directly from the riots. Before Breck Artery started working on his documentary in the spring of 1970, activists old and new, galvanized by the Stonewall uprising, were organizing at an unprecedented pace and intensity. Later, we'll bring you more from Breck and his documentary record to tell the story behind the historic marches 1 year after the riots. But first, we're going to take you back to those first days, weeks, and months of activism after the shit hit the fan. The Stonewall riots had made news, but the coverage in the mainstream press was full of the usual homophobia and bigotry.
New York Times, June 28, 1969. 4 policemen hurt in village raid.
Hundreds of young men went on a rampage in Greenwich Village shortly after 3 a.m. yesterday, after a force of plainclothesmen raided a bar that the police said was well known for its homosexual clientele.
New York Daily News, July 6, 1969. Homo nest raided. Queen bees stinging mad.
Last weekend, the Queens had turned commandos and stood bra-strap to bra-strap against an invasion of the tactical police force.
With a battle cry of gay power, the Nellies, femmes, gay boys, queens, all those who flaunt their homosexuality have been demonstrating that they have indeed been pushed too far.
Before the riots ended, the Village Voice published its account of what happened. The Voice was a downtown alternative weekly newspaper, but it was not progressive on gay issues. In fact, the Village Voice's reporting on the riots was particularly barbed.
The sudden specter of gay power raised its brazen head and spat out a fairy tale, the likes of which the area has never seen. The forces of faggotry, spurred by a Friday night raid on the Stonewall Inn, rallied Saturday night in an unprecedented protest.
On the first night of the riots, one of the Voice's reporters was on the street. The other was inside the Stonewall, barricaded in with the cops. The account they wrote was published in the middle of the week of riots.
Full moon over the Stonewall. The sound filtering in doesn't suggest dancing faggots anymore. It sounds like a powerful rage bent on vendetta.
The article provoked an angry reaction immediately. Hundreds of young people massed outside the Voice's offices, which just happened to be a couple of doors down the street from the Stonewall Inn. Gay youth were joined by members of radical groups like the Black Panthers and the anti-war Yippies. Despite the violent protests, Village Voice writers kept up the anti-gay language.
And then the next week, the Voice was filled with letters saying how the use of the word faggot was anathema to everything the Voice stands for and to everything I stand for, blah, blah, blah. There was an amazingly obnoxious article by, I can't even, Henry Troy Spencer or something, I don't know, but some amazing, Walter Troy Spencer, some amazing three-name, he comes out and says the great faggot revolution and the faggotry and the purple finery,
Activists like the one you just heard speaking in a recording from 1969 would soon have an answer to the Voice's bigotry, with more organizations, more protests, and their own newspapers with titles like Come Out, Gay, and the Queen's Quarterly. The days of gay people tolerating hateful press coverage were over.
If Mattachine wants to act straight, they're going to act straight into irrelevancy.
At the end of June and in early July 1969, members of the newly formed Mattachine Action Committee were in the streets handing out flyers for a meeting scheduled for July 9th. But there was some homophile business to attend to in Philadelphia first. The last of the annual Reminder Day protests on July 4th at Independence Hall. In Episode 1, you heard how the rift between one generation of activists and the next was breaking out into the open, while Craig Rodwell was calling Frank Kameny anti-Tom, and young activists were defiantly holding hands. Morty Manford, fresh from witnessing the Stonewall riots, was struggling with his identity when he headed to Philadelphia that Friday.
Where did I go? I went with a friend from New York, from the Stonewall. I think I wore sunglasses.
To hide your identity?
Yes. Then when I saw cameras, I think I turned my face away. It was a process of starting to deal with it a little bit at a time.
Morty Manford was still processing. He hadn't come into his own as an activist yet, but Martha Shelley was ramping up. Before the riots, she'd been the president of the lesbian homophile organization, the Daughters of Bilitis, and she went to the July 4th Reminder Day protest too, dutifully decked out, awkwardly, in a skirt and blouse. But Martha was mulling the idea of something more militant than a picket. She and the other members of the Mattachine Action Committee wanted a march, and they got one. On Sunday, July 27th, 1969, just a month after the riots, hundreds of people gathered in Greenwich Village to demand an end to discrimination and police harassment. It was the biggest gay rights march to date.
So we marched around the village, and we ended up at Sheridan Square, across the street from the Stonewall Inn.
How many were there of you?
I thought there were only 500. Some people said that there was more. I've heard it as much as 2,000. Mm-hmm. And I remember us jumping up on this little water fountain and making our speeches. And then afterwards I said, well, we should disperse and go home because there's going to be more. Keep your ears open. There'll be more meetings, and this ain't the end of us.
She was right. It wasn't the end of them.
Tonight, our program deals with the radical homosexual organizations. The Gay Liberation Front is the name for a radical, militant, homosexual organization, which formed soon after the Stonewall riots.
This is New York community station WBAI's radio show for and about the gay community, called The New Symposium.
Michael Brown could tell us, how did you left again?
Host Charles Pitts and Pete Wilson taped this broadcast in an apartment with a group of GLF members in early September 1969.
It arose out of the Mattachine Action Committee shortly after the Stonewall riot. And there were a number of people who felt that there was a need for an organization which was more closely tied with the community than Mattachine. And there was a division of feeling with the Mattachine Society, and we left. And then
Marty Robinson thinks I came up with the name Gay Liberation Front. I don't know who said it. I remember it coming up at the meeting, and I remember pounding my fist in the table, yelling in exultation, that's it, we're the Gay Liberation Front.
Why? What was it about that name that did it for you?
Because it was like the National Liberation Front of North Vietnam.
What was that?
That was the Viet Cong, the Army of Liberation that was heroic in the eyes of the left. Here were all of these Vietnamese peasants daring to stand up to the most powerful army in the world with all of its tanks and helicopters and napalm. We pinned all of our fantasies on that group without understanding anything about their culture. The one thing we did get right is that they were fighting against a very oppressive force that was trying to deny them the right to run their own country their way. And it was David against Goliath.
Martha Shelley was one of the co-founders of the GLF, although founder is a tricky word to attach to the Gay Liberation Front, which was a strictly non-hierarchical and consensus-led group. GLF members were often active in other movements, fighting for racial justice, socialist causes, and women's liberation.
Like what I learned at Women's Lib yesterday at that demonstration, what I've been feeling in my own life, the more I affirm myself, the more I am myself in the world, and the more we relate to each other and do our thing, the more we're going to be able to do what's natural to us and feel good about it, and let the weight of the hang-up fall on those who are distressed.
Right.
Like I can look at a woman now and say, I'm homosexual, and smile and feel good about it, and watch her whole thing collapse and go crazy, right? And I don't have in all my life I've borne the weight of others' hang-ups.
Right.
I've internalized it myself. I don't have to do that.
We're not sure which GLF member that was speaking in September 1969, but we do know that over the summer of 1969, the newly formed GLF had got together with the Alternate U and found a home. The Alternate University, or AU, was a group and it was a place, a buzzing center of counterculture and political organizing in a big industrial loft on the corner of 6th Avenue and 14th Street at the edge of the village. Martha Shelley could still picture it vividly when I asked her about it 20 years later in 1989.
Some of the graffiti on the wall, and God said E equals MC squared, and there was a light show, groovy. That kind of graffiti.
Ancient language.
Yeah. And we had dances there, and they were massive. I mean, these dances were jammed.
Dozens of people? Hundreds of people?
Hundreds. I remember serving on security one night and being up most of the night because we'd had threats. The mafia, I think the mafia the mafia never really did anything, but there were people who didn't like us having dances where we sold beers for 50 cents and sodas for a quarter when they were busy flogging beers for a couple of bucks in their damn bars. And you could dance all night. You didn't have to pay extra to go into a special room where dancing was allowed, which is the way it was in some of the old bars like the Sea Colony. I think the dances were really important because we were expressing ourselves physically, we were expressing our affection for each other and our sense of community in those dances, which you couldn't do in gay bars. Also, there was this tremendous emphasis on the gay bars on looks, and I'm sure there still is. But at least in the gay liberation dances, there was this consciousness of we are here to give each other love and acceptance, and who we are is okay. And there were circle dances. You never saw that in a gay bar. Instead of two people against the world, it was our whole community.
A few minutes' walk from Alternate U, at Craig Rodwell's apartment at 350 Bleecker Street, plans were afoot for more marches.
We sat here, Ellen, Linda, Fred, and myself. This is before the ERCO conference.
A quick translation. Fred was Fred Sargent, Craig's lover. Ellen Broidy and Linda Rhodes were lesbian student activists, and they were a couple too. ERCO was, and are you ready for a sexy name? The Eastern Regional Council of Homophile Organizations, which was behind the Reminder Day pickets.
And we did up a formal resolution and everything to change the annual reminders to Christopher Street Liberation Day to be celebrated last Sunday in June to commemorate the birth of the gay liberation movement as exemplified in Stonewall riots. We sat it for hours and worked the whole thing up with resolutions. And we presented to ERCO in November of '69.
It was Ellen Broidy who stood up at the ERCO conference in Philadelphia in November and proposed the resolution for a new annual march. Ellen says she wanted to take the fight for gay rights to the next level.
I never would have stood up in Philadelphia at the Eastern Regional Conference and said, get rid of this march around Independence Hall if I had thought it was anything other than a very conservative plea for acceptance. And I had no patience with that. We wanted to smash the state.
The motion to establish the march was passed by everyone except Dick Leitch's Mattachine. Martha Shelley had a theory about why some of the old guard were not big fans of the new radicalism.
People would send in their money to DOB and Mattachine and hope that one person would be the leader and go out there and represent them while they hid in the closet, and somebody else would fight for their rights. But once we were all out on the streets fighting for our rights, we wouldn't need Dick Leitch anymore, or me, or anybody else who was the public spokesperson.
You didn't really care, though, about your position.
No.
You didn't want to be president.
No, I just wanted to make the world safe for me. That's it. So that I could live in my little, as it turned out, house without a white picket fence and enjoy my life and not feel that, I was going to get thrown in jail for sleeping with a woman. I would have also liked to overturn the world, bring peace, justice, and prosperity to every human being on the planet. And I think that was still a fine idea. But I didn't have any desire to run the world or be boss, and I still don't.
Without the support of the Mattachine Society, and in fact not affiliated with any specific group, the newly formed Christopher Street Liberation Day Committee held its first meeting in January of 1970.
Actually, the first meeting of the committee, it was like 2/3 women. And actually the first few meetings, the concept of the thing changed at every meeting. Because like the people, the meetings were different every meeting. And each group would have a different idea of what it should be and how it should be, set up. And finally we settled on the format that took place. And the idea, in a nutshell, is to set aside the day for a show of unity, solidarity, and pride, collective pride of gay people, and not to have it appear that it's run or actually be run by one organization.
And the number of organizations was multiplying. In late December of 1969, activists frustrated with the GLF's non-structure and its alliances with other, not explicitly gay causes, split off to form the Gay Activists Alliance, a single-issue group that counted Marty Robinson among its early members.
GA is utilizing nonviolent militancy to secure what it wants, somewhat by hitting the system below the belt rather than just trying to cut the rug out from under the system entirely.
Sylvia Rivera was also an early member of GAA. This is the first ever recorded interview with Sylvia, taped in December 1970. Sylvia's talking about how she joined the Gay Activists Alliance in February or March of that year, and about how she faced discrimination from the get-go.
I made a phone call from Jersey. It's like, do you accept transvestites? At that time, I was still using the word drag queen. I said, do you accept drag queen? Sure, come on down. So my friends and I tipped down there to the meeting from Jersey. We took a peek. Here was nothing but butch male homosexuals that always oppressed transvestites. And we were very flamboyant with the makeup and everything, tipping in, really looking beautiful. So we walked in and like, what's your name? At the table, you had to write your name. I said, my name is Sylvia. He says, what is your name? I said, I'm Sylvia. He says, well, we can't accept that name. So I wrote down Sylvia Lee Rivera, and in parentheses, I have the habit of putting Ray Rivera, my real name. Even butch identify, even men, homosexual males that are dealing with their sexism are always discriminating against transvestites. Because they just can't, we're threatening their masculinity. This is the way they feel.
Within a month of joining GAA, Sylvia was arrested for petitioning for gay rights in Times Square. The cops said she was soliciting for sex. Sylvia had been harassed by the police and arrested scores of times in Times Square. This was the first time she'd been arrested for exercising her civil right to protest.
Of course, conditions for gay people have not changed much for the better in the past year, and police raids such as the one that triggered the Stonewall uprising have continued, most notably at the Snake Pit, another village bar. Bob Kohler of New York's Gay Liberation Front says he thinks a repetition of the Stonewall riots is possible.
Yeah, I think it could happen again. I mean, the people, Stonewall was a dope drop. I mean, I think people making Stonewall's become sort of a legend, and the kids have become folk heroes, which really isn't true. But something like the Snake Pit, you've got
they're tinderboxes, and I think, yeah, it could happen again. I would hope not, but I think it could.
It's not like the police raids magically came to an end after the Stonewall riots. They continued. In the pre-dawn hours of March 8, 1970, the cops raided an after-hours gay bar in a basement just a stone's throw from the Stonewall called the Snake Pit. It was a radicalizing moment for many, including Vito Russo.
Among the customers arrested was an Argentinian national, and Diego Vinales was here on a visa, and he was afraid that if it came out that he was gay, he would be deported. And he jumped from the second floor of the police station window on 10th Street to try to escape and landed on a spike fence. And they had to bring acetylene torches to cut him off. And he was brought to St. Vincent's Hospital in critical condition, at the edge of death for like 3 days. He eventually lived, by the way, and went back to Argentina. I was on my way home from work, and I passed St. Vincent's. There was a candlelight vigil, and I remember being handed a leaflet. And the leaflet said, no matter how you look at it, Diego Vinales was pushed. And that's when I put two and two together, that in fact, he was pushed from that window. He was pushed by society. That if he didn't have to be so scared of being deported, he wouldn't have jumped. And so for the first time, the organized response reached me on a gut level. And that was the following Thursday when I went to my first Gay Activist Alliance meeting.
The GAA had leafleted and organized protests within hours of the raid, including the vigil that Vito mentioned, and a march that swept up Morty Manford.
I was sitting with some friends having a sandwich or something at Mama's Chicken Rib, a popular gay coffee shop on Greenwich Avenue. And this demonstration went by, hundreds of people with protest signs and chanting, and obviously a gay demonstration. And said to my friends at the table, let's join it. Nobody wanted to join it. I said, well, I'll see you later. I wasn't going to let the parade go by.
That parade and the vigil have been called the very first ZAP. Marty Robinson is generally credited with coming up with ZAPs, which were rapid response direct action protests. They became a signature of the GAA.
The Gay Activist Alliance has begun to confront politicians openly on the streets. They attempted to ask questions of Arthur Goldberg, the Democratic candidate for governor, during a campaign stop at 86th Street and Broadway in Manhattan. When Goldberg refused to respond to the gay people's questions, they proceeded to shout him down and drive him away. Demonstrators surrounded his car and protested his silence.
Crime of silence! Crime of silence! Crime of silence! Crime of silence! Crime of silence!
Your next governor of the state of New York.
You pig! You're a pig too, mister! You're a pig too, you know it? You're a pig too! You're a fucking Nazi, baby!
There were further confrontations between the gay people and straight bystanders on the street after Goldberg had left the scene.
I was talking to Mr. Blumenthal before this happened.
I've been talking for 5 years, goddammit. I don't care how long you've been talking.
State Assemblyman Al Blumenthal stayed on the scene for over half an hour, attempting to assure gays that Goldberg was really on their side. Blumenthal promised to work for a change in New York State's discrimination law to ensure equal protection for homosexuals.
But we're not going to change society overnight, and we're not going to change the police overnight, but we are making efforts to change the law, and I think we're going to succeed.
After the incident was over, Jim Owls, president of the Gay Activist Alliance, was asked what he felt the confrontation had accomplished.
Well, I think we showed Arthur Goldberg that whenever he makes an appearance in the city, he has to be willing to speak to his homosexual constituents. He said that he didn't think it was an important enough issue, but obviously if he went into a black neighborhood, he would speak to the black problems, or he would have gotten the same reaction. So we're just going to let him know that wherever he appears, he's going to expect the same type of thing.
Protests, newspapers, and organizations were popping up everywhere, and as spring turned to summer, preparations for events to commemorate the Stonewall Uprising went into full swing. Craig Rodwell and the other members of the Christopher Street Liberation Day Committee had been in planning mode for several months. Craig's business, the Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookshop, was a nerve center for organizing the march. As a side note, Craig had opened his store in a tiny space on Mercer Street in late 1967. It was America's first ever gay bookstore. Anyway, back to the Pride March organizers. They applied for a permit. It was rejected. But the very next day, they were called to a meeting at the NYPD's 3rd Division headquarters. Craig recalled the meeting. And I warn you, Craig uses some very outdated language here. He was speaking in December of 1970.
And we walked into this room upstairs, and all this brass sitting there, lieutenants and inspectors and sergeants and everything. We were informed that a representative of the mayor's office was there, and that the mayor wanted to report back from the meeting as soon as it was finished. And we still to this day don't know exactly what happened, whether the mayor found out that they denied our permit. But the whole meeting was to go over the route. They had the head of all the precincts there that we were going through, the head of the Parks Department. The inspector was there who was in charge of the raid on the Stonewall Pine. He just sat there and glared at us in the whole meeting. Spooky was the only word for it. He didn't say a word, just like that, the whole meeting. And they had a few questions, and the only thing we were concerned with was that, and we felt we should inform the police that there would be female impersonators there and how would they handle it. And we asked them to realize that this was one day, and this was the gay community, and that they were part of the community. And we felt they had a right to exist, and if they chose to wear clothes of the opposite sex. And at the same time, we realized there was a law against it. However, there are thousands of laws in this city that you do not enforce every day. And we are asking you, in the name of human decency, for one thing, respect for other people, and also a desire for a peaceful day and a peaceful march, not to enforce that law on that day. And their reply was they, of course, couldn't tell us that they wouldn't enforce it. So we didn't know what was going to happen.
Nobody knew what was going to happen. Gay liberation was breaking new ground with never-before-seen large-scale public protests by LGBTQ people, and the largest ever demonstration by LGBTQ people in the United States was about to take place. 50 years ago, Breck Artery was living in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where he was news director at a local radio station. On a Monday morning at work, he read a small item in the New York Times about, quote, disorder outside the Stonewall Inn. Breck knew what he wanted to do next.
I moved to New York City in the fall of 1969. It became clear to me that the Stonewall riots had spawned a new gay movement. I thought it would be worthwhile to make an audio documentary on what was going on. I was going to school and I was working part-time, and so I did it when I could. I just went out and interviewed as many people as I can to find out what was going on with the gay movement and how the whole landscape had changed.
Thanks to Breck Artery and his tape recorder, we can now tell you the story of the first Pride March. On Saturday, June 27th, 1970, in Chicago.
Mike Barda of Chicago Gay Liberation welcomed the crowd this way.
I want to welcome everybody here on behalf of Chicago Gay Liberation on this celebration day, part of Gay Pride Week. We're here because we're gay and we're proud that we are.
In Chicago, as across the country, the gay movement has brought out many people who are new to marches and demonstrations. One of them put it this way.
I've never gone on a march before, and I'll be damned if I've ever been in a movement before. But all of a sudden, something that touched the corner of my life and its inner core began to have some kind of meaning. And I had to say that I've got to be out here no matter what.
When the Chicago marchers reached their destination at the downtown Civic Center, there were more speeches. Bill Try said gays could be in the vanguard of those working to change American society.
We don't have to listen to all the rhetoric that explains what's wrong with this sexist, racist society. We know. Because we're gay, we can be the leaders in the revolution that is going to make this society a better place to live. Gay power!
Saturday also saw a small march in San Francisco. 20 to 30 people marched up Polk Street. After the Chicago and San Francisco marches, on the morning of Sunday, June 28, 1970, Breck Artery got up, got dressed, and left his apartment in the West Village.
I think I was wearing jeans and a T-shirt and a jacket, and the reason I had a jacket on was to carry extra audio cassettes because I was recording interviews and natural sound along the way. And it was a pretty warm day. It was late June, and the jacket was making me kind of hot, but I needed that to carry my equipment. I went out to the assembly area about 2 to 3 hours before the march was scheduled to begin, and it looked pretty disappointing. There were very few people around, but as the time for the march to begin came closer, the crowd began to build.
People began to gather in the parade assembly area on West Washington Place, just a few blocks away from Christopher Street, where angry mobs of gay people had rioted just 1 year before. The mood today was different. The sun was shining, people were laughing, meeting old friends and making new ones. The straight press was there, with most of the reporters and many perplexed straights trying to make some sense out of what was going on. But for the most part, they were ignored, as the gay marchers were caught up in their newfound spirit of pride and assertion. It was a time, a place, and an atmosphere for homosexuals to be together as one united group as they had never been before. Thousands of gay brothers and sisters were holding hands, chanting, singing, and expressing their love for one another. They were asserting the common bond which holds all homosexuals in America together, a bond which few heterosexuals could ever understand. As the crowd began to build in the assembly area, Kay Tobin, a reporter for the newspaper Gay, was asked how she felt.
Looks very good. It's very dispersed right now, but I think when it's all pulled together, it'll be very, very strong, very good. And we still have an hour to go, after all.
What about the turnout of women so far? Does it look pretty good?
Yeah, I think it's very good. Yeah, very good.
Exactly 1 hour later, the march began to move. Out of West Washington Place, onto the Avenue of the Americas, or 6th Avenue, as native New Yorkers refer to it. For the most part, the demonstrators were cheered as they walked through the village. As the marchers passed the Women's House of Detention at Greenwich and 6th Avenues, a chant of "Free our sisters, free ourselves" welled up.
Free our sisters, free ourselves! Free our sisters, free ourselves!
The march, which had grown 15 blocks long, moved toward 14th Street, past Alternate University. The clenched fist salute was raised to the windows of the school, and the straights inside the building returned the greeting.
2, 4, 6, 8, gays unite to smash the state! 2, 4, 6, 8, gays unite to smash the state! 2, 4,
The march continued north past 42nd Street, which for years has been one of the most repressive and degrading streets in the U.S. homosexual experience.
2, 4, 6, 8, gay unite is good and straight! If not better!
Hundreds of different signs were carried aloft during the march, such as "Gay Power," "This is our country too," "We are the people our parents warned us against," or simply "Gay Pride." As the marchers wended their way through Central Park toward Sheep Meadow, the old civil rights song "We Shall Overcome" was heard. As the demonstrators arrived in Sheep Meadow, spontaneous applause and cheering erupted as the group at the front of the march stopped, turned around, and saw the streaming masses crowding up behind them, further than the eye could see. Thousands upon thousands of gay people poured into Sheep Meadow from the march route. The feeling was pervasive. It seemed as if everyone there knew that something of major importance had just happened to them, that there could be no turning back to the old days of hiding, degradation, and denial of their basic humanity.
Oh, this is tremendous. It's really great.
There's been nothing like this before, and I hope it sets a tone and a trend for the whole future.
It's beautiful. Just beautiful. It's just absolutely incredible. I don't think the impact will mean anything to me until 2 days later.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I feel better. Brothers and sisters, man, this is really where it's at.
It was so beautiful. I was in the middle of the march. I couldn't see the front because it was too far ahead of me, and I couldn't see the back. I couldn't believe it. It was just fantastic. It was beautiful. Beautiful. I'm just the happiest day so far of my life.
That's what we needed for a long time.
It's marvelous. Fantastic. Really is.
I feel very liberated because of this. There must be 15,000, 20,000 people here today.
Nobody expected it to turn out like this. This is the best thing that's happened to the gay movement.
There were many people in Sheep Meadow that day, and as the straight world is learning, they were as varied as any other large group of people. There were rich and there were poor, militant and reserved, young and old. Some had waited many years for this day. Jack Nichols tells of one.
Prescott Townsend was there from Boston. He's a very elderly gentleman, almost 80 years old. He'd come down to march the whole march all the way up. And he has a bad hip, too. I happen to know that. He was one of the first people in this country to start with homosexual civil liberties. Once chained himself to the Massachusetts state legislature. And old Prescott was there carrying a sign that said Gay Pride.
Nichols went on to give his personal reaction to this day.
We stood at the top of the hill in Sheep's Meadow and watched thousands upon thousands of people come up the hillside, and my eyes filled up with tears while I watched all of these people cheering, very happy, healthy-looking crowds. It was a great experience.
It's been said that homosexuals will never win respect and acceptance from straight people until they respect and accept themselves. This they're beginning to do. The road to freedom is always a long and painful one, but on June 28th of 1970, the American homosexual took the most important step toward his freedom, the liberation of his own mind. As one participant said to me, a new spirit of regained humanity is awakening in homosexuals all over the world, and it won't stop until all of us, all of the millions of gay people, can stand in the sun and be free, as we were for a few hours today.
What Stonewall sparked, the activism of the following year stoked. The number of organizations nationwide rose from 50 to 60 groups before the uprising to more than 1,500 a year later, and 2,500 within 2 years. Next episode, we're heading to the Stonewall Inn for a live show recorded in front of some of you, our amazing listeners, and featuring an intergenerational conversation between activists reflecting on Stonewall's legacy, and we'll dive into the historical context with a leading LGBTQ archivist. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Breck Artery for recording the voices of the marches 49 years ago and for so generously sharing them with us. Thank you, Breck. Many thanks to everyone who makes Making Gay History possible. Executive producer Sarah Birmingham, producer Josh Gwynn, assistant producer Mo Laborde, administrative and special projects manager Inga Dataya, scoring, mixing, and sound design by Ray Kantrowitz, photo editor Michael Green, and our social media team Christiana Pena, Nick Porter, and Denio Lorenko. Thanks also to our intrepid researchers Brian Faree and Brian DeShazer. Special thanks to Jenna Weiss Berman. Additional score and our theme music was composed by Fritz Myers. Thanks to the National Park Service's Stonewall Oral History Project, in partnership with the LGBT Community Center and the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, for the clip of Ellen Broidy that you just heard, courtesy of the LGBT Community Center National History Archive. That 1970 audio you heard of Sylvia Rivera was recorded by Liza Cowan. At the time, Liza was a producer at WBAI Radio, later editor and publisher of Dyke, a quarterly. And these days, she's an artist and graphic designer whose work can be found at www.smallequals.com. And thanks to
Steve Holt and
Margie Smith of Get Me Rewrite
for their help recreating those hateful newspaper headlines. Making Gay History is a co-production of Pineapple Street Media with assistance from the New York Public Library's Manuscripts and Archives Division, the One Archives of the USC Libraries, and the Pacifica Radio Archive. Season 5 of this podcast has been made possible with funding from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, the Calamus Foundation, Irwin and Andrew Press, and our listeners, including Matilda Brooker. Thanks, Matilda.
Thanks, Matilda.
Stay in touch with Making Gay History by signing up for our newsletter at makinggayhistory.com, by finding us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or by emailing us at hello@makinggayhistory.com. We love your letters. Head to our website to find previous episodes, archival photos, full transcripts, and additional information on each of the people and stories we feature. So long, until next time.